Not the neat version they tell in Alliance reports. Not the cleaned-up version they repeat in polished meetings where everyone speaks slowly and pretends nothing surprising ever happened. And definitely not the official summary that gets passed through layers of translators, legal officers, and diplomatic reviewers until all the dangerous parts have been sanded off and replaced with phrases like productive cultural exchange and adaptive performance calibration. That no, I want to tell you the version I remember, the version I was actually there for. The version that began in a human training building on Earth, in a place called the United States, in a state called Texas, which in hindsight should have warned me immediately that events were unlikely to remain reasonable. My name is VH. Among my people, the Keithel, I held the rank of mid-level diplomatic liaison officer, which sounds much more impressive than it truly was. In practical terms, it meant I was the one sent to assignments that senior diplomats described as interesting whenever they wanted to avoid saying unpleasant. I had negotiated trade rights near unstable asteroid lanes. I had met with species that spoke only through changes in body temperature. I had once endured a ceremonial meal hosted by the Garuan, a species whose idea of hospitality involved throwing food directly at honored guests while chanting loudly enough to shake tableware off the walls. That I survived all of that with my dignity mostly intact. None of it prepared me for Maravos. The year was 2189 that the Galactic Alliance had recently expanded again, adding 7 new member species. The Keithel were among them. As part of the membership agreement, every new species had to place a group of personnel into what the Alliance called the Unified Physical Integration Program. This was, in theory, a standardized readiness assessment. In practice, it was a mandatory physical training program designed to make sure that any species contributing people to join Alliance operations could meet a minimum level of strength, endurance, coordination, and field usefulness. That was the official language. The less official version was simpler. They wanted to know whether we could keep up. The Alliance had partnered with humans to run the program. That I remember reading that line in the agreement and feeling no concern at all. Humans, at that point in my experience, seemed entirely manageable. I had met exactly 3 of them before receiving the assignment. All 3 had been administrators. All 3 wore stiff clothing. All 3 drank shocking amounts of a dark, bitter liquid called coffee with the seriousness of people taking emergency medicine. They had seemed fragile in the way many short-lived species seem fragile. Busy, alert, slightly overworked, but not especially alarming. When volunteer nominations opened, I submitted my own name. I also selected 3 others from our delegation. First was Solek, my deputy, who was broad even by Keithel standards and had the calm, heavy personality of a large stone that had somehow learned regulations. Then there was Quina, our species relations officer, who was smaller than most Keithel and compensated for this, in her view, quite fairly, by having opinions powerful enough to fill the missing space. Last was Dak, our technical analyst, who spent most of his life inside data streams and only occasionally returned to the physical world long enough to remember that conversations required participation. That we arrived at the facility on a Tuesday morning. The official name of the place was the Joint Alliance Readiness Center. The humans working there called it something quite different. Unfortunately, the phrase they preferred does not translate cleanly into most diplomatic languages. Though based on tone and context, I believe it meant something close to the place where optimism goes to suffer. The building complex was enormous. Low gray structures spread across a wide stretch of flatland under a sky so intensely blue it looked unnatural, as if the planet itself were trying too hard to appear trustworthy. There were other species already there. A group from the Vorak collective point, 2 tall, 4-armed beings from the Chevry systems, and several Peltherians, sitting under a shaded overhang in complete silence with the defeated expressions of people who had already learned something unpleasant and had no interest in sharing it. That should have been my second warning. That we entered through the main processing hall and were received by a human administrator named Petra Oren. She had short dark hair, a clipboard made of actual paper, and the kind of controlled smile that suggests a person is perfectly capable of being polite without feeling even the smallest emotional connection to you. She checked our names, gave us printed packets, pointed down a long corridor marked with colored lines and said, Instructor Voss has your group. Section 7. Follow the red line. That was all in a welcome speech, in a reassuring explanation. Just a red line on the floor, and a name spoken with such complete neutrality that it somehow felt ominous that we followed the red line. Section 7 was a large open room lined with equipment that looked equal parts industrial and hostile. The floor was thick black rubber. The walls held racks of metal bars, stacked plates, cable machines, benches, hanging straps, and various pieces of apparatus I could not identify, but immediately distrusted. The room smelled like metal, effort, and something dry and sharp that I would later learn was chalk. There was already one trainee inside. Human male. Young by human standards, I guessed. Broad shoulders, light brown hair, tired eyes. He stood near one of the racks with the posture of someone who had not slept enough but had accepted that sleep was no longer part of the day's negotiations. This was Finn Baxter. We did not know his name yet, but we noticed him. And then we noticed the instructor. She was standing with her back to us at a large whiteboard, writing something in clean, hard letters that looked less written than imposed. She was not tall, at least not by our standards. The average Keithel stands well over 2 meters. She was perhaps 1.7 compact, yes. But there are structures in the galaxy that are not large and still should not be challenged. She had dark red hair pulled tightly back, a fitted long-sleeved training shirt, forearms that suggested she had built a private and ongoing argument with gravity and was winning it, and a stillness to her posture that did not read as relaxed. It read as controlled. She turned when we entered. All right, she said. You're here. Good. That was her greeting. She looked at each of us in turn. Not lazily. Not casually. She looked the way scanners look. Like the purpose was not seeing, but measuring. Her eyes were a pale gray-green, the kind of color some oceans turn shortly before weather becomes personal. There was a name patch on her shirt. Voss. My name is Mara Voss, she said. I'm your primary instructor for the next 8 weeks. During that time, I will assess your current physical ability, push it farther than you think it can go, and then determine whether you are fit for Alliance joint operational readiness. She paused. I prefer to pass people. I work toward passing people, but I do not invent standards that are not there. Beside me, Quina leaned slightly closer and whispered, She is very compact. I whispered back, Do not say that out loud. Why? I do not know, I said honestly, but I strongly believe it would be a mistake. Mara Voss walked to the center of the room, holding a tablet in one hand. She placed it on a bench without looking at it, as if whatever data was inside had already been memorized and judged. Today is assessment day, she said. No pressure, no performance. I just need to know where you're starting, so I know how to program from there. She gestured toward the barbells stacked near the far wall. We begin with a deadlift. Standard form. Pick the bar up from the floor. Stand with it. Put it down again. I'm not interested in theatrics. I'm interested in movement quality, effort level, and baseline capacity. Then she looked at all of us and said the sentence that caused the first disaster. Lift what you can. Now, I need to explain something important. Among the Keithel, physical strain is private. Not secret exactly, but private. You do not publicly display the outer edge of your ability unless the situation truly requires it. Maximum effort in front of others is seen as a loss of control, a kind of social overexposure. It is not admired. It is slightly embarrassing that if a Keithel says do what you can, what they usually mean is do an appropriate amount, a dignified amount, a controlled amount that does not force anyone present to witness your limits. When Mara Voss said, lift what you can, our minds translated it through Keithel logic. Solak went first. He selected a moderate weight, lifted it smoothly, stood tall, and placed it back down with complete control. No straged, no visible stran. Respectable. Quina did the same. Dak nearly forgot to brace because he was still reading something on his datapad as he approached the bar, but he recovered midway and completed the movement without incident. Then it was my turn. I chose a weight that felt socially correct. I lifted IT. IT was easy. Far easier than I expected. I set it down and stepped back. Done. Mara Voss made a note on her tablet. Her expression did not change at the time. I thought that meant nothing. Later, I understood that an unreadable face on a human like Mara Voss is not the same as neutrality, that IT is often the early stage of conclusion. Then Finn Baxter stepped forward. He had been watching all of us with the controlled expression of someone trying very hard not to comment on what he was seeing. He rolled his shoulders once, cracked his knuckles in the deeply unsettling human way that always sounds like joints are breaking when apparently they are not, and stepped up to a bar loaded with far more weight than any of us had touched. Then he lifted, I want to be exact here, he did not merely raise the weight. His whole body changed shape around the effort. His back locked into place. His legs drove into the floor with violent purpose. His face turned red. A vein rose along the side of his neck, as if his body had temporarily decided to display its internal engineering. The room seemed to narrow around the sound of the lift. He stood upright with the bar, held it for a breath, and set it back down with control. Then he stepped away and exhaled like someone who had just completed an argument with death and won by a narrow margin. The room went quiet. Good, said Mara Voss. She wrote something on her tablet. And this time, for just a moment, I saw the smallest shift at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile. Not exactly. More like the beginning of one, the expression of a person who already knows the truth and is waiting patiently for everyone else to arrive at the time. I misunderstood that look completely. I assumed she was pleased because her human trainee had performed well. I thought this was ordinary instructor pride. It was not. She turned back to the group. We'll do 3 more assessments today, she said. After that, I'll review the numbers, build your individual programs, and proper training starts Thursday. Her eyes moved across us once more. I'm going to say this now because I prefer honesty over comfort. Every species in this room is capable of passing this program. I'm not saying that to encourage you. I'm saying it because I reviewed your biological and structural profiles before you arrived. I know what is possible. Then she looked directly at us. What most of you showed me just now was not it. Quina stiffened beside me. Solak made a low sound that in Keithel communication means I disagree with this, but have not yet chosen the format of my objection. I said nothing. Not because I agreed, because something in the way Mara Voss spoke made response feel useless, not dangerous, just useless, like arguing with gravity. She continued the session, that we completed the other assessments, mobility work, loaded carries, pull tests, endurance measurements. By the time we were released back to the assigned quarters, all 4 of us were unsettled in ways that had nothing to do with fatigue. That evening, Solak sat on the edge of his reinforced bunk, looking deeply suspicious of the entire human species. Quina paced in tight circles, which she only did when her thoughts were moving faster than her pride. Dak had spread the printed assessment packet open across his bed and was reading it with the focused intensity of someone who believed the universe had hidden an insult somewhere in the fine print and intended to find it. Finally, Quina said what all of us had been thinking. We were not lifting what we could. Solak folded his arms. We lifted appropriately. That is not the same thing, Quina said. It is culturally the same thing, he replied. Dak looked up from the packet. No, he said. It is not. We all turned toward him. He tapped a section of the printed document. I found the Alliance baseline chart, he said. The minimum deadlift requirement for joint readiness certification is 3 times body weight. There was a silence. Then Solak said, very carefully, minimum. Dak nodded, minimum. I thought about the weight I had lifted, how easy it had felt, how far below effort it had truly been. That I thought about Mara Voss watching me with that unreadable face while I performed what I had considered a respectful version of strength. And slowly, in a way that was both humiliating and clarifying, I began to understand something. She had not been watching to see whether we were able. She had been watching to see whether we knew we were able. And with our neat, careful, socially correct lifts, we had answered her very clearly. No, we did not know. That I lay back on my bunk and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Thursday, I said eventually, to no one in particular, is going to be unpleasant. Outside, the Texas sky had gone black and heavy with stars. Somewhere else in that sprawling facility, I was quite certain Mara Voss was reviewing numbers and building programs with the calm focus of a person preparing consequences. I had negotiated with acid-breathing delegates. I had survived a summit inside the upper atmosphere of a gas giant. I had once been launched by mistake in a low orbit during a farewell ceremony. I had misunderstood on 3 separate cultural levels. And yet, lying there, in a human bunk, under a human ceiling, on a human planet, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time, that I was nervous about Thursday. Thursday arrived the way consequences often do, quietly, without ceremony, with the calm confidence of something that has been waiting for you to stop misunderstanding the situation. That we walked into Section 7 at the time printed on the schedule point 6 in the morning. Now, if you have never experienced 6 in the morning on Earth in Texas, in a building that apparently believed heating was a privilege rather than a system requirement, let me explain it properly. It was cold. Not dramatically cold by planetary standards. Not lethal. Not even impressive. But it was the kind of cold that feels personal when your species prefer the much warmer range and your joints begin filing complaints before your thoughts are fully awake. For the Keithel, comfortable temperature begins around 22 degrees Celsius and improves from there. Below that, we functioned that we simply object to it. The air inside the room had the sharp, unfinished taste of early morning. Outside, the sky was still dark enough that it felt as though the sun had not yet agreed to participate. Mara Voss was already there. Of course she was. She was not drinking coffee. She was not checking messages. She was not stretching, yawning, or exhibiting any of the small transitional rituals I had come to associate with humans preparing themselves to become functional. She was in the center of the room with a loaded barbell across her upper back performing squats. Down, up, with complete control. The bar had enough weight on it that even from the doorway, I could tell it was not decorative. I had only a few days of familiarity with human weight measurements by then, but I estimated it at around 120 kilograms. She did not stop when we entered. She did not turn. She did not acknowledge that we existed. She completed 12 repetitions, stepped forward, racked the bar, rolled one shoulder once, and only then turned to face us. "You're on time," she said. "Good. Keep doing that." Beside me, Solek leaned slightly closer. "Was that a warm-up?" he asked. "Yes," I said. That he was silent for a moment. Then he made a low sound in his throat, which, translated into formal diplomatic language, would mean something like "My threat assessment has been revised upward." Mara picked up her tablet and began walking slowly in front of us. Not pacing. Inspecting. She stopped in front of each trainee, just long enough to compare the person standing there to whatever numbers or notes she had already collected. She reached me and stopped. "VH," she said. The pronunciation was correct, perfectly correct. This surprised me enough that I nearly reacted to it. Most humans, even polite ones, adjusted Keithel names in a softer, sounds more comfortable for their own mouths. Mara Voss said mine exactly as it should be said, which meant she had either practiced it or considered proper pronunciation the minimum requirement for doing her job correctly. I did not yet know which possibility was more revealing. "Yes, instructor," I said. "You are the senior member of your group." "I am." "Then understand this now, because I will say it once, and I will not repeat it later in a gentler form." She had a particular way of speaking. Every word landed with the same weight and theatrical emphasis. No raised voice. No unnecessary force. Just facts, placed one after another like bricks in a wall that had already been measured and cut before you arrived. "The program I built for your group is not easy. It was never meant to be easy. It is designed to find the distance between what you think you can do and what you can actually do." She paused. "Then it is designed to close that distance." Another pause, by force if necessary. I felt something tighten in my shoulders. Then she added, in the same tone, "Not physical force. You will understand the distinction by this afternoon." And then she moved on. I remained where I was, suddenly less cold and more concerned. The morning session began. I will not describe every minute of it, because that would require more patience than either of us currently possesses, and also because pain becomes repetitive in the retelling unless something interesting is happening inside it.so. I will tell you the shape of it. Keithel training systems are precise, orderly, measured. You perform a defined movement for a defined number of repetitions. You rest. You repeat. You document. If your body signals distress, you acknowledge the information and modify accordingly. This is considered intelligent and efficient. Mara Voss treated bodily distress as useful information, yes, but not final information. She listened to fatigue the way an aggressive lawyer listens to testimony from a witness she does not fully trust. Carefully, closely, and with the clear intention of finding out whether the witness was exaggerating, she corrected everything. Not broadly, not with general advice. Specifically, painfully specifically, she would stop a movement halfway and say, "Your left hip is turning early," or "You're bracing after the load instead of before it," or "You're leaking force through the upper back. Fix that." And what was deeply irritating was that when we adjusted the exact thing she named, the movement improved immediately. The weight moved cleaner, faster, more securely. It was like discovering that your body had been trying to communicate with you your entire life, and this human woman from Texas had somehow become fluent before you had by the second hour. Quinna had gone almost completely silent. This was how I knew she was taking the session seriously. Quinna speaks when she is confident. She becomes quiet only when she encounters something that does not fit into her existing categories. Dak dropped a bar. Not dangerously, N.O. injury, N.O. catastrophe. But he lost his grip near the top of his set, and the bar hit the rubber floor with a heavy crash that snapped every eye in the room toward him. Dak looked at Mara Voss with the expression of someone expecting formal confirmation that he had failed in a way that would now become administrative. Mara looked at the bar, then at Dak. "Pick it up," she said. Dak blinked. "I lost control of it." "Yes," she said. "I saw that. Pick it up. I could have caused an incident. You didn't. Should I reduce the load?" She blinked once. "Dak, the load is correct. Your grip is not where it needs to be yet. That is why you are here. Pick it up." Dak stared at her for half a second longer, then bent down, reset his stance, and lifted again. This time he completed the set. Mara gave a single nod. Not praise, not celebration, just acknowledgement. The kind you give when reality has finally begun cooperating with expectation. Somewhere in the third hour, Finn Baxter failed a lift. He pulled a heavier bar than he had managed on Tuesday, got it to knee height, slowed, and then could not finish the lockout. That he lowered it with control, stood up, and let out a hard breath through his teeth. Too soon for that number, he muttered. Mara was next to him almost immediately. "Not too soon," she said. "Your grip width changed." Finn looked down at his hands. "You went narrower than Tuesday. Same hand position as your successful set, and it moves." He reset, adjusted, pulled again. The weight came up. Clean, complete. Mara nodded once. "There." Then she moved away as if this had been obvious from the beginning and had required only brief correction, not drama. I remember watching that interaction very carefully, because it told me something I had not expected. I had assumed a human instructor working with multiple alien species would rely on broad motivational language and patient compromise. I expected cultural sensitivity presented at a safe professional distance, that I did not expect biomechanical precision, that I did not expect her to understand our structures well enough to identify weak points after only days of observation. And I certainly did not expect her to treat a failed attempt not as proof of limitation, but as a problem with a specific answer. That unsettled me more than shouting would have. Anyone can be intimidating. Competence is rarer. By the time the morning session ended, my legs felt as though they belonged to someone else and had not yet agreed to continue our partnership. We were released for food and rest. Most of us spent the break horizontal, not sleeping exactly, more the state where the body has collapsed, but the mind is still replaying events in an attempt to understand whether what happened was training or some highly targeted educational punishment. The afternoon session was where the shape of everything changed. When we returned to Section 7, the room was more crowded. The Chevy trainees had joined our block, which added both height and extra limbs to the general atmosphere, but a senior alliance coordinator was also present, a human man named Galt, who stood near the entrance with a notepad. Now, in my diplomatic experience, anyone standing quietly with a notepad is rarely there for casual observation. That a notepad means judgment has entered the room. Mara Voss was loading a barbell. Not casually, not approximately. With the smooth, fast efficiency of someone who had done it so many times that the math happened somewhere below conscious thought. Plate, and hesitation, and checking. No chart. Each addition seemed to belong to a number she had already decided on long before we arrived. When she stepped back, the bar contained, by my estimate, close to 200 kilograms. The room had gone quiet. Even the chevre, who produce a constant low harmonic vibration when thinking, had stopped humming. Mara looked at the bar, then at us. "I'm going to demonstrate the standard," she said. "Not the finish line. Not the final expectation, the direction." She glanced once toward Galt and his notepad, then back at the trainees. "The Alliance readiness requirement is practical, not symbolic. In field operations, you will move equipment, lift equipment, carry personnel, and stabilize loads under pressure. The number on the bar is not theoretical. It represents real work." Then she stepped toward it. "There are moments before great effort that are recognizable across species. Athletes know them. Soldiers know them. Anyone who has ever committed fully to something difficult knows them. It is the instant where the decision has already happened internally and the body is only a fraction of a second behind." Mara set her feet, reached down, took the bar in both hands, breathed in once, and lifted 200 kilograms, left the floor. I have spent enough time in diplomacy to know that there are moments when your understanding of another species changes permanently. This was one of them. Not because of the number alone, but because of the ease with which the impossible became visible. Not easy in the sense of effortless. There was effort, obvious effort. Her face reddened. The vein along her neck returned. Every muscle through her body engaged in the kind of full system coordination most species reserve for emergencies or war. But the movement itself was certain. Hesitation and doubt. Just force directed through structure with absolute commitment. She stood upright, locked the lift out, held it for a moment that was either 1 second or 5. I still cannot say. Time behaves strangely when your worldview is being dismantled in front of you. Then she lowered the bar under control. The plates hit the rubber floor once. The sound moved through the room like a statement. She stood up, rolled her shoulders back, dusted chalk from her hands, and said, in the same tone one might use to mention a weather reading, "That is a working number, not a maximum. A working number." The silence after that could have been stored in containers. Then Solek, who remains one of the bravest people I know largely because he sometimes asks questions before fear is time to stop him, said, "What is your maximum?" Mara looked at him. "More," she said. That was the entire answer. One word. Decoration, and pride, and invitation for discussion. Near the door, Galt wrote something on his notepad. I turned to Quina because I needed confirmation that I had heard correctly and that my brain had not entered some kind of protective hallucination. Quina was staring at the barbell. She said very quietly, "Yes." On Tuesday, when she said, "Lift what you can," yes. We lifted the polite amount. We did. And she watched us. Yes. And wrote things down. Yes. She already knew. I did not answer because at that exact moment Mara Voss began walking toward us, and I had developed enough survival instinct by then to understand when a conversation was about to become official. She stopped in front of me. Of course she did. Senior member, diplomatic liaison, natural target. "I want an honest answer," she said. "No diplomacy." I considered saying that diplomacy is often simply honesty with better timing, but I did not think this would improve my situation. "Of course," I said. "On Tuesday," she said, "when I told your group to lift what you could, and you all chose numbers that were clearly below your actual functional capacity, what were you thinking?" I thought briefly about giving her the clean, formal explanation. Then I remembered that she had repeatedly shown preference for accuracy over comfort. I gave her the real one. "We thought we were being appropriate," I said. "Among the Keithol, public maximum effort is considered immodest. We selected weights that felt socially correct, not physically maximal." She listened without interrupting, then nodded once. Not dismissive, not impatient, simply processing. "Understood," she said. "Different culture, different logic. I respect that." Then she looked at the bar she had just lifted. "But here's the problem. In a joint operation, If the work requires more than your culture finds comfortable, the work does not stop to protect your preference. No sharpness that, in oh cruelty, just a fact stated in full. I need your real number, she said, not your polite number. I looked at her, then at the barbell, then back at her. And something settled into place in my mind with a firmness that was almost embarrassing, because suddenly the entire week made sense. The unreadable expression on Tuesday, the comment about honesty, the way she had watched instead of reacting. She had not been measuring strength alone. She had been measuring permission, specifically whether we had given ourselves any. Instructor Voss, I said carefully, when you told us to lift what we could, did you mean what was comfortable for us? I gestured lightly toward my group. Or, what did you mean? I looked at the bar again. That, she held my gaze, and for the first time, fully and unmistakably, she smiled. Not professionally, not politely, but a real smile. Small, quiet, deeply satisfied. The smile of someone who has been waiting for the correct question and has finally heard it. Now, she said, you're asking the right question. All of you, she said. The room changed. I do not know how else to explain it. Nothing physical shifted. No alarm sounded. No lights changed. But every person in Section 7 became still in the same instant. There are some voices that do not need volume to create obedience. Mara Voss had one of them. You're going back to the bar, she said. Your bar. The correct one. And this time you will lift what you can. Not what feels polite. Not what looks composed. Not what your home culture considers socially elegant. What you can. She looked across all of us as she spoke. Keithel, Chevry, Peltherians, Finn Baxter. Every species in that room. Every body with its own rules, customs, habits, pride, and excuses. The limit we're dealing with in here, Mara said, is not the bar. It is not the plate number. It is not even fatigue. Not yet. She picked up her chalk bag and rolled it once in one hand. The limit is the story you've been telling yourselves about what you are. The room stayed silent. That story, she said, is not accurate. Then she looked around the room again, and there was nothing emotional in her face. No anger. No inspiration performance. No motivational drama. Only certainty. I have read your files. I know what your species can do. 8 weeks from now, you're going to know it too. She set the chalk bag back down. Get to the bar. So we did. There are moments in life where change feels loud. This was not one of those moments. This one was quiet, a shift inside the mind, that a single internal decision, stop acting restrained and start acting honest. What happened over the next 90 minutes did not look extraordinary from the outside. At least not in the dramatic way stories often try to present these things. N01 shouted. N01 gave speeches. There was no swelling music from nowhere, no grand revelation glowing in the air that we simply lifted more, much more, and the reason mattered that we were not suddenly stronger than we had been on Tuesday. That would have been nonsense. Bodies do not transform in 4 days because a human woman with frightening forearms gives a powerful demonstration. What changed was not capacity. What changed was permission, that we stopped performing restraint, that we started performing effort. And those two things, though they can look similar from a distance, are completely different inside the body. Restraint is controlled. Effort is alive. Restraint manages appearances. Effort spends itself fully on the task. The body knows the difference. Immediately, Quina went first among us. She approached the bar with the kind of expression she used whenever she had reached the point of being too irritated to remain cautious. Mara had already adjusted the weight for her. Not absurd. Not reckless. Just accurate. Quina stared at the bar for a moment, as if it had personally offended her. Then she set her hands, tightened her back, breathed in, and lifted. The weight moved. Not easily. Not cleanly at first. But it moved. She stood up with it, held it, and brought it back down. Point one of the nearby Chevry trainees turned one of his upper hands slightly outward in what I later learned was their involuntary sign of impressed respect. Quina stood over the bar for a second, breathing hard. She said nothing, but her face had changed, not outwardly dramatic, just altered. The expression of someone who had opened a door in her own home and found an entire room she had not known existed. Then came Salik. Salik who disliked unnecessary displays. Salik who valued. steadiness above almost everything. Salik, who on Tuesday had lifted a deeply civilized amount and seemed satisfied with that decision, that he stepped to the bar, set his feet, and pulled. The bar rose more slowly for him, but it rose. Halfway up, I saw something cross his face that I had almost never seen there before. Not fear. Not pained at recognition, though his body had just informed him that it had been waiting patiently for him to stop underestimating it. He locked the lift out, set it down, and looked at the plates with quiet suspicion, as if they had lied to him personally. Dak went next. This day, I still think Dak's lift mattered most to him, even if none of us said it aloud. Dak did not struggle with strength as much as he struggled with commitment to the immediate physical moment. His mind was always elsewhere. Inside reports, numbers, systems, probabilities. The body, to Dak, was something necessary but inconvenient, like weather. Mara watched him set up. "Brace first," she said. Dak inhaled, hands tighter. He adjusted. "Good. Now pull." Dak pulled. The bar came off the floor. There was a brief shaking moment at mid-shin where I thought he might lose it again, but this time he held on, drove upward, and finished the lift. When he set it down, he looked at his own hands as if they belonged to someone newly hired. Mara nodded once. "There," she said. That one word did something to him. I could see it. Not praise, not comfort at recognition. It is a strange thing how powerful simple recognition becomes when it is given by someone who does not hand it out cheaply. Then it was my turn. Mara had changed my weight too. I looked at the bar and knew immediately that this was no longer a symbolic exercise in cultural understanding. This was a demand for truth. That I stepped forward, set my feet, took the bar, and became aware all at once of the old instinct rising again. Not make a scene. Not look strained. Not let them see the edge. It is remarkable how loud a lifetime of training can become in the exact moment you decide to defy it. Then I heard Mara's voice from somewhere to my left. "Breathe H. Simple, calm, not loud. Now brace." I did. "Good. Pull." So I pulled. The weight came up heavier than anything I had touched on Tuesday. Heavy enough that my whole body had to agree to it. Heavy enough that there was no spare energy left for dignity. And that, I think, was the moment I understood the deepest part of what she had been trying to teach us. When you stop spending effort on looking controlled, you have more effort available for being effective. The bar moved slowly. Honestly, I stood with it. I felt the full strain of it in my legs, my back, my grip, my lungs. Then I lowered it again and let go. I was breathing harder than I liked. I did not care. Not because I'd suddenly become less Keithel, but because for the first time I could feel physically and clearly the difference between restraint and output. Mara gave me a brief glance. "Better," she said, just that, better, and somehow that word carried more force than praise would have, because it did not end the road. It only pointed down it. Around us, the rest of the room kept moving. The Chevry adjusted their posture mechanics and lifted higher than they had earlier in the week. The Peltherians, who always looked slightly offended by existence even under ideal conditions, discovered that several of them had been sandbagging their numbers by an embarrassing amount. Finn Baxter trained through all of it with quiet focus, saying little but watching closely, and I noticed something about him, then he was not surprised by Mara. Not really. He respected her, yes. Possibly feared her a little in the healthy way trainees fear highly competent instructors. But he was not shocked by her standards that he had seen this kind of thing before. For him, this was not a revelation that IT was normal. That thought stayed with me. IT disturbed me in new and interesting ways. Because if Mara Voss represented a type rather than an exception, then human physical culture contained depths I had not even begun to map. T1 point. Quina finished another set and stepped aside next to Finn, both of them breathing hard. She looked at him and said, "Is this normal for human training?" Finn wiped his hands on his shorts, considered the question, and said, "Depends who your coach is." Quina looked across the room toward Mara, who was at that moment correcting a Chevry trainee's deadlift setup with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb made of bad technique. That, Quina said, is not a comforting answer. Finn gave a tired half-smile. "No," he said. "It usually isn't." The session continued. Mara moved through the room like a force with a clipboard. She corrected angles, hand positions, Foot pressure, breathing, timing. She remembered everything. Not only the broad limitations of each species, but the individual habits of each trainee. You could not hide inside general categories with her. If your right side was stronger than your left, she knew. If you protected a weak grip by rushing the top of the movement, she knew. If you turned your feet slightly outward because it made you feel more stable even though it cost you force. She knew that too. I had met analysts with less observational precision. And what remained most unsettling was that none of this seemed difficult for her. This was simply what her attention looked like at the end of the 90 minutes. The room smelled even more strongly of chalk, rubber, heat, and exhausted effort. Bodies were slower. Faces were R.E. and O1 looked elegant, which, I now understood, had probably been the point. Mara called us, and we gathered in front of her, and O1 was speaking. Even Quina had temporarily reached the edge of commentary. Mara looked at us all for a long second, then said, "Better." That was it at first. Just the same word again. Not impressive, not excellent. Better. Then she added, "Not because you became stronger since Tuesday. Because you became more honest." I felt that sentence land harder than I expected. Beside the door, Galt closed his notepad. He did not say anything. He simply tucked it under one arm, gave Mara a small nod, and left. In diplomacy, when observers leave without comment, it usually means they have seen exactly what they came to see. Mara glanced toward the door after he was gone, then back at us. "Same time tomorrow," she said. "Sleep. Eat properly. Hydrate. Your bodies will be adapting tonight, whether you help them or not." She bent to pick up her bag. Then she paused. Not with drama. Not like someone preparing a speech. Just the small pause of a person deciding whether one final sentence is worth the silence it will interrupt. Apparently, she decided it was. Without turning back, she said, "You were not weak on Tuesday." The room stayed still. "You were polite." Then she looked over one shoulder. "There is a difference." And with that, she walked out. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then Quina said, in a voice balanced exactly between offense and admiration, "I cannot decide whether that was insulting or helpful." "Both," said Finn Baxter from across the room while re-racking his plates. He did not even look up. That's usually how it works. Quina stared at him for a second. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. Not loudly. Just once, that short, sharp sound of surrender to a truth she had not wanted but could no longer deny. I stood there a moment longer, looking at the bar I had lifted. The new number. Higher than Tuesday, still far below wherever Mara intended to drag me by the end of 8 weeks, and somewhere in that space, between the version of myself I had arrived with and the version that had just started to appear, I felt something I had not expected, not confidence, not yet. Something earlier than that, curiosity. Outside the windows, Texas had turned gold with late afternoon. Long shadows stretched over the flat ground beyond the buildings. 8 weeks suddenly seemed both very long and not long enough that I picked up my bag and followed the others out, carrying with me the uncomfortable and undeniable realization that Mara Voss had not begun this program by teaching us how to get stronger. She had begun by teaching us that we had been lying to ourselves. And the most dangerous part was this. She had proof. The next morning arrived before any of us were ready for it. Not physically, not mentally, and certainly not culturally. That we walked into Section 7 again at 6. That's still cold, still dark, still quiet in that early Earth way where the world feels paused, like it has not fully decided to begin yet. This time, though, something was different. Not in the room. INUS. N01 spoke as we entered. NO side conversations. NO whispered observations. NO attempts to interpret or soften what we had experienced today. Before, there was a shared understanding now. Simple, uncomfortable, accurate. Tuesday had not been training. IT had been exposure. Thursday had not been instruction. IT had been correction. And now, whatever came next was going to be deliberate. Mara Voss was already in position again. Not lifting this time. Standing, tablet in hand, watching the door as we entered. That more than anything told me something had changed. She was waiting, not preparing, waiting. "You adjusted," she said. Not a question today. Statement. Yes, I said before anyone else could respond. She looked at me briefly, then nodded once. Good. That saves time. That sentence carried more weight than it should have. Save time for what? She turned and walked toward the center of the room. Today, she said, we begin building, not assessing, not correcting, building. There is a difference between discovering capacity and developing it, she continued. Yesterday you discovered it. Today we start making it repeatable. She set the tablet down. Strength that appears once is an accident. Strength that appears consistently is training. She looked at all of us. We are interested in the second one. That was how it started. Not with a warm-up speech. Not with motivation. With a standard that we began moving almost immediately. This time the structure was different, more organized, more layered. Less about seeing, more about shaping. Mara moved us through sequences, not random exercises, connected ones. Everything had a purpose that linked to something else. Deadlifts into carries, carries into holds. Holds into movement again. T first, it felt chaotic. Then, slowly, it began to feel like a system. A system. Designed not just to test strength, but to remove the weak links that prevented strength from being used properly. She stopped Solak mid-carry. You are bracing only when the weight shifts, she said. It is stable, Solak replied. It is stable because the distance is short, she said. Longer distance, you lose it. Brace before movement, not after. He adjusted, continued. And I could see it. The difference, less effort wasted. More control. Same strength. Better use of it. She stopped Quinna next. You're holding tension in your shoulders, Mara said. It feels more secure, Quinna replied. It feels safer, Mara corrected. It is not stronger. Drop the shoulders. Let the load sit where it should. Quinna hesitated, then adjusted, and the movement changed. Cleaner, more efficient, less strain where it did not belong. Quinna did not comment, which meant she understood. Dak lasted longer this time before making a mistake. That in itself was progress, that he rushed a transition between movements, lost alignment, nearly stumbled. Mara stepped in immediately. Stop. Dak froze. Reset. You were thinking ahead of the movement again. I was preparing for the next. You are not there yet, Mara said. Finish the current position first. Then move. Dak inhaled slowly. Reset. Continued. And this time he stayed inside the moment. It was a small correction, but I could see the impact. Less hesitation, less instability, more presence. Then it was my turn again. Of course it was. Mara had an excellent sense of timing when it came to placing attention exactly where it would be most uncomfortable. VH, she said. Yes. You are still managing your breathing. I blinked. I am breathing. You are controlling how it looks, she said. Not how it works. That stopped me. Because she was correct. Even now, even after yesterday, there was still a part of me trying to appear composed, trying to maintain a version of control that was more visual than functional. Fix that, she said. How? I asked. Stop deciding how effort should look, she said. Let the body decide what it needs. That was not a technical instruction, not in the way the others had been, but I understood it anyway. Or at least I understood enough to try it out. We moved into the next set. I lifted. And this time, I did not try to regulate the outward appearance of the effort. I did not try to keep the breath quiet. Or the movement smooth beyond what was necessary. I just did the work. The difference was immediate, messier, louder, but stronger, more direct. When I finished, I was breathing harder than before, noticeably, and for a brief moment, the old instinct returned. That sharp awareness of being seen, of appearing strained, of crossing some invisible line of composure. Then I realized something. No one cared. Not because they were ignoring me, because they were doing the same thing. Everyone in that room had crossed that line already. The space had changed. IT was no longer a place where effort needed to be hidden. IT was a place where effort was the only thing that mattered. Mara gave a small nod. There, she said again. That word was becoming familiar. Not comfortable, but familiar. The session continued. Harder than the day before. Not because the weights were drastically higher, because the expectations were more guessing, and more holding back, and more polite versions. Only the real one, T1 point. One of the Peltherians stopped mid-set. Completely stopped, set the weight down, stepped back. I cannot maintain this output, he said. Not dramatic, just factual. Mara walked over. Why? Fatigue accumulation exceeds expected threshold, he said. She nodded slightly. Correct, she said. That is what fatigue does. He looked at her, then at the weight, then back at her. You want me to continue? Yes. It will degrade performance. Yes. It may result in failure. Yes. There was a pause. The Peltherian considered this, then asked, why continue if failure is likely? Mara answered immediately, because your definition of failure is wrong. The room went very still. You think failure is when the movement stops, she said. It is not. Failure is when you stop applying effort before the movement forces you to. She pointed at the bar. If it stops because you gave everything you had, that is data, that is progress. If it stops because you decided in advance that it would, that is avoidance. The Peltherian stared at her, then slowly nodded. He stepped back to the bar, picked it up, and continued. He did fail the next repetition. But now I understood what Mara meant, that IT looked different, that IT felt different, that IT was not avoidance, that IT was effort reaching its limit. And that limit was now visible. Finn Baxter watched that exchange closely, then looked at me. You guys didn't have this kind of training before? He asked quietly. No, I said. We had structure. This is structure, he said. Yes, I replied. But it is more aggressive. Finn smiled slightly. Yeah, he said. That sounds about right. By the time the session ended, the room felt heavier, not physically, mentally, like something had been added that could not be removed again. Understanding, expectation, responsibility. Mara brought us in again that we stood in front of her, breathing harder than yesterday, moving slower, thinking more. Better again, she said. Same word, same tone, different weight behind it. You were starting to apply effort correctly, she continued. Now we build consistency. She looked at each of us, not scanning, assessing. You will be sore, she said. You will be tired. That is not a problem. That is the process. She paused, then added, what matters is whether you show up the same way tomorrow. Not physically the same, mentally the same. That part was clear. She picked up her tablet, then her bag, walked toward the door, and again paused. This time she did not turn. You are not learning to lift weights, she said. The room stayed silent. You are learning to remove the limits you placed on yourselves. She opened the door. If you do that properly, everything else follows. Then she left it. An O closing speech, an O emphasis, just the sentence, and the expectation that we would understand it. We stood there for a moment. Then Solak spoke. That is not training, he said slowly. What is it? Quina asked. Solak considered, then said, it is correction of belief. Dak nodded. Yes, he said, with physical evidence. Finn, from across the room, added, welcome to human training. Quina looked at him. I am not sure I like it, she said. Finn shrugged. You don't have to like it, he said. You just have to survive it. That earned a small laugh, even from Solak. We gathered our things, slower than before, heavier than before, but different. There was less uncertainty now, less confusion, more clarity, not comfortable clarity, but real that as we walked out, I glanced back once at the empty racks, the bars, the plates, the space where just 2 days ago we had performed our carefully controlled version of effort. And I understood something that I had not expected to understand so quickly. Mara Voss was not changing our bodies. First, she was changing the rules we used to define them. And once those rules changed, everything else had to follow. By the end of the first week, we stopped asking certain questions. Not because we had answers, because the questions themselves had become unnecessary. Questions like, how hard should I push? Is this enough? What is appropriate? Those disappeared. Mara Voss had removed them. Replaced them with something much simpler. I asked this everything I can do right now. If the answer was no, you adjusted. That if the answer was yes, you continued until it wasn't. It sounds straightforward when stated like that. It was not. Simple to live. Our bodies adapted faster than our thinking did. That was the surprising part. Physically, we improved. Not dramatically at first, but steadily. Movements became cleaner. Weights that felt impossible on Tuesday became possible by Friday. Not easy, but possible. But mentally, that took longer because every session forced us to confront something uncomfortable. Not weakness, not exactly. Inaccuracy that we had been wrong about ourselves. Not slightly wrong, systematically wrong, and Mara Voss did not allow that error to continue unchallenged. She corrected it every day, sometimes with instruction, sometimes with silence, sometimes with a single word again. That word became significant, not loud, not emotional, just consistent. You finish a set, you step back, you think you're done again, and you realize you're not finished. You had simply decided to stop. That distinction followed us everywhere. That'd be why the second week. The environment in Section 7 had changed completely. Not physically. The same bars, the same racks, the same smell of chalk and metal and effort. But the atmosphere, different. There was no more hesitation when approaching the weights, and no more looking around to measure how others were performing before choosing your own level. Everyone knew what was expected now. Not from Mara, from themselves. That was the real shift. The Chevy moved with more precision, less wasted motion. Their natural strength began to show through once they stopped overcompensating with unnecessary complexity. The Peltherians, who had initially treated the entire program as an inconvenience, became focused, still unpleasant, still visibly unhappy about the entire experience, but focused, which for them was a significant improvement. Dak changed in a way I did not expect. That he began staying present, not perfectly, not always, but more often. His movements became less distracted, more deliberate. He started finishing sets without looking at anything else, an datapad, an external reference, just the work. And after one session, he said something I had never heard him say before. I understand the feedback now. What feedback? Quina asked. The body's feedback, he said. It is more precise than I assumed. That might not sound like much, but for Dak, that was a complete shift in worldview. Solid became dangerous. There's no better word for it. Not aggressive, not reckless. But once he accepted that his previous limits had been self-imposed, he stopped negotiating with them entirely. He lifted with the same calm presence as before, but the numbers kept rising, and he never commented on it, which made it more concerning. Quina adapted in her own way. She did not become quieter. That would have been unnatural. Instead, her commentary changed. Less complaint, more observation, more analysis. She began treating the training like a problem to solve instead of an experience to critique. This is inefficient, she would say mid-set. Then adjust, then lift better. Mara never responded to those comments directly, but I noticed something. She listened, and when Quina's observation was correct, Mara would nod. Once. That was all the validation Quina needed. That AS for me. I stopped trying to understand the program. Intellectually. That was my mistake at the beginning, trying to categorize it, fit it into known structures, compare it to Keithel training systems IT did not fit, because it was not designed from the same assumptions. Once I accepted that, progress became simpler, not easier, but clearer. Lift, adjust, repeat, and no interpretation required, just participation. Finn Baxter remained constant through all of it, steady, focused, unsurprised, which I realized was its own form of experience. Point one afternoon, after a particularly difficult session, I asked him directly, "How long have you been training like this?" He shrugged slightly. "Since I was a kid," he said. "That is normal for humans?" "Not all," he said, "but the ones who stick with it." "Yeah." I considered that, then asked, "And Maravas?" Finn paused, then gave a small, thoughtful smile. "She's not normal," he said. "That is reassuring," I replied. He shook his head slightly. "Not in the way you think," he said. "She's not extreme. She's just exact." That word stayed with me. Exact. IT explained everything without exaggerating anything. Mara Voss did not demand more than was possible. She demanded exactly what was possible and no less and no more, and that made her unavoidable. By the third week, something else began to happen. Something I had not anticipated. We stopped fearing the sessions. Not because they became easier. They did not. If anything, they became more demanding as we improved. But the uncertainty was gone. We knew what would happen. We would be asked for everything we had that day. and we would give it. That predictability removed fear. What replaced it was anticipation, not excitement, not enthusiasm, but a kind of readiness, that a willingness to enter the process and see what would happen. That, more than anything, marked the real change, that we were no longer reacting to the training, that we were participating in it. Point one evening, near the end of the third week. We sat outside the facility. The Texas sky was wide and quiet, the air warmer than usual for once comfortable. Quina was lying back, looking up. Solak was seated, still as always. Dak was reviewing something, but slowly, without urgency. That I was watching the horizon. Processing. This program, Quina said, is not what I expected. No, I said. It is not even what it claims to be. What do you mean? It is not a fitness program, she said. That is only the surface. Dak nodded slightly. It is behavioral correction, he said, using physical stress as the mechanism. Solak added, it removes false limits. We were quiet for a moment. Then Quina said, do you think she knows that? I almost laughed. Yes, I said. I think that is exactly what she is doing. There was another pause. Then Dak said something that settled everything. She knew on Tuesday. We all looked at him. What do you mean? I asked. She knew we were not lifting fully, he said. Not because of the numbers. Because of the pattern. The pattern? Yes. Controlled movement. No stran. No instability. No variation. It was too clean. I thought about that and realized he was right. We had not just lifted light, we had lifted safely, predictably, without risk, and that had told her everything she needed to know. Solak exhaled slowly. So she did not correct us immediately, he said. No, Dak replied. She waited. For what? Quina asked. Dak looked at all of us, for us to see it ourselves. That was the moment it became completely clear. Mara Voss had not started by telling us we were wrong. She had created a situation where we would prove it to ourselves. And once we saw it, there was no going back. I leaned back and looked up at the sky. 8 weeks, 8T the beginning, that it seemed like a long time. Now it felt precise, exactly enough. Because this was not about building strength from nothing. That IT was about uncovering what had been there all along and removing everything that had been, hiding it. I thought about Tuesday, about the polite lifts, the controlled effort, the careful restraint, and I understood something fully now that I had only begun to grasp, and that we had not been weak, not even close, that we had been limited. By choice, by habit, by belief, and Mara Voss had done something very simple. She had refused to accept those limits as real. I stood up, picked up my bag, and looked back once more at the facility. 8T section 7.8T, the place where everything had started shifting. Not dramatically. Not all at once, but steadily, unavoidably, and I realized something else, that we had come here to be evaluated. That was what the Alliance had told us. What was actually happening was that we were being rebuilt, and the process was only just beginning.